You kneel down beside the wilted rose bush, your fingers brushing the soil, and you murmur something you'd never say out loud to another human being. A quiet apology to the plant you failed. The first scrap Sue James reaches for is the coffee filter from his morning press, still wet and warm. He doesn't throw it in the trash. He doesn't toss it in the compost pile either. He walks straight to the rose garden, kneels down, and digs a shallow trench about 3 inches deep with his bare hands. Inside that trench, he lays the filter flat, then covers it with soil. Not mixed, not buried deep, just placed like a blanket under the topsoil. The ESALC USP study from 2019 measured exactly what happens next. 8 days after burying dried coffee grounds, the pH of the surrounding soil neutralizes. It doesn't spike acidic the way every online forum warns. It balances. The tannins that repel earthworms when scattered on the surface simply dissolve underground, and the microbes that feed on the carbon begin their invisible work. But here's the trap. Most people bury the filter whole, still dripping, still packed with wet grounds. That's the mistake that attracts the fungus gnats. Sue James lets the filter drain for 30 minutes after brewing, then spreads the grounds across a paper towel to dry for an hour before burial. Dry grounds break down differently in the soil. They absorb moisture instead of releasing it, which prevents that sour fermentation smell that turns your garden into a breeding ground for pests. The MIT research from 2022 on historical rubbish gardening confirmed what his grandfather learned during World War II. Shallow burial of mixed dry scraps feeds soil microbes without pulling nitrogen from the surrounding root zone. The key is the dryness, not the scrap itself. If the way that rotten smell hits your nose when you open a bag of wet kitchen scraps feels familiar, stay with me. This is where the real trick starts. That one detail, the 30-minute drain, the hour of air drying, is the difference between a pest invasion and a silent microbial feast. If you want to unlock the other 6 scraps in the same forensic way, subscribe to this channel so you catch the next episode before the algorithm buries it. And right now, in the comments, type the one mistake you made with coffee grounds, wet or dry. I need to know how many of us fell into the same trap. The second scrap is the banana peel, but not the way you think. Everyone says, drop the whole peel into a jar of water for 3 days and pour that liquid on your plants. Sue James laughs at that. He takes the peel, cuts it into 1-inch strips, and lays them flat on a baking sheet in the sun for 6 hours until the edges curl and turn brown. Then he crushes the dried strips into flakes with his hands and sprinkles them around the base of the tomato plant like a ring of salt. Michelle, the gardener from the Houseplant Guide, confirmed this method works because the dried peel releases potassium in a slow gradient over 4 weeks instead of a sudden dump that overwhelms the roots. The water method, by contrast, ferments within 48 hours and produces a sour liquid that actually repels the very earthworms you need. The third scrap is the eggshell, and this is where the botanists start shaking their heads. Sue James does not crush the shells with his hands. He does not throw them whole around the plant base. He rinses the shells, lets them dry on the windowsill for 3 days, then grinds them in a coffee grinder dedicated only to shells until they become a fine white powder. The Universidade Federal de Viçosa decomposition table shows a clear number. Whole eggshells take 6 months to break down in soil. Powdered shells release calcium in 24 hours. That's the difference between a tomato that develops blossom end rot and a tomato that grows firm, glossy, and heavy enough to bend the stem. He sprinkles this powder directly into the planting hole before transplanting any seedling. mixing it with the soil he removed so the calcium is available from the moment the roots touch the ground. Some people hear this and think it's too much work. You're not that person. You already know the difference between waiting months and waiting hours. If you've made it this far, you're the kind of gardener who digs for evidence instead of accepting shortcuts. Subscribe now. The next 3 scraps build on this patience principle. And I want you to see the full sequence before you try any of them. Drop a comment below. Have you ever dried and powdered eggshells before? Or is this the first time you've heard it done right? Your answer tells me whether you're already on the path or just starting to question the old habits. The 4th scrap is the rice washing water. Grandmothers across multiple generations saved that cloudy white water after rinsing their rice and poured it on wilting bushes. Modern science finally caught up. The starch in the water feeds the beneficial bacteria on the root surface, and the trace minerals, thiamine, niacin, iron, act as a mild growth stimulant. But So James does one thing differently. He dilutes it. 1 part rice water to 4 parts tap water. Undiluted rice water ferments in the soil within 2 days. And the lactic acid bacteria that thrive on the starch can actually outcompete the fungi your plant needs. He pours the diluted mixture only in the evening, never in the morning sun, because the starch breaks down under UV light and becomes useless within hours. The historical gardener from the 1940s knew this instinctively. She always watered at dusk, never at dawn, for the same reason. The 5th scrap is the celery base. Most people see the white end of a celery bunch and throw it in the compost or the trash. Sue James places it in a shallow bowl with 1 inch of water on the kitchen windowsill. Within 4 days, roots appear along the cut edge. Within 7 days, tiny green leaves emerge from the center of the base. Then he transplants it into a pot with a mix of his own dried eggshell powder and coffee grounds. And within 3 weeks, he has a full new celery plant. The modern instructional content for seniors 55 plus promotes exactly this method because it requires no soil, no special lighting, and no expensive equipment. Just water, a windowsill, and the patience to watch roots grow. The 6th scrap is the onion base, and here's where the failure case gets brutal. You cut off the root end of an onion, place it in water, and wait. That works. But if you leave the outer papery skin attached, the water turns slimy within 3 days and the rot climbs up into the growing shoot. Sue James peels away every dry layer until only the firm white base with the root hairs exposed remains. Then he suspends it over the water using toothpicks so only the roots touch the liquid, not the flesh of the onion itself. Leek bases work the same way and produce new leaves in 2 to 3 days. The trick is the air gap. If the flesh sits in water, it rots. If only the roots touch water, it grows. Now imagine your rose bush 3 days from now, standing tall under that humid morning sun, the earthworm you saw this morning still working its magic underground, the coffee grounds you buried yesterday already feeding the soil microbes that will feed your plant next week. At what point in this video did you realize you've been burying scraps wrong your whole life? Write it in the comments. I need to know how many of us would make the same mistake. The 7th scrap is the stale bread, the one everyone throws away without thinking. Sue James crumbles it into coarse pieces, spreads it on a tray, and bakes it at the lowest temperature in his oven for 20 minutes until it's completely dry and brittle. Then he crushes it into a coarse powder and mixes it with the dried eggshell powder at a ratio of 3 parts bread to 1 part shell. This mixture goes into the bottom of his planting holes for any heavy-feeding plant. Tomatoes, zucchini, cucumbers, bread provides a slow-release carbon source that the soil bacteria break down over 2 to 3 months, releasing energy that feeds the plant's root system without the nitrogen drawdown that fresh scraps cause. The composting expert from the Modern Guide explicitly warned against putting bread directly into the garden because it attracts rodents. Sue James solved that by baking it dry first, which removes the moisture that attracts pests while preserving the carbon structure. Here's where most people quit. They try one of these methods, don't see instant results, and go back to the synthetic bag. But the ESALC study measured the pH shift on day 8, not day 1. The root formation in the celery takes 4 days, not 4 hours. Patience is the mechanism. The old gardener didn't guess. He buried one coffee filter under his rose bush and left the other bush untreated. After 8 days, the treated soil pH measured 6.5. The untreated soil measured 5.8. The study predicted neutralization. His garden delivered it. Now imagine what happens when you apply all 7 of these methods simultaneously. The coffee grounds feeding the microbes, the eggshell powder providing calcium, the banana peel flakes releasing potassium, the rice water stimulating root bacteria, the regrown vegetables replacing store-bought greens, the stale bread feeding the soil carbon cycle. That's not gardening. That's alchemy. And the botanists are still trying to explain why it works. You've just watched a system that turns your kitchen waste into a closed-loop fertilizer factory. If you want to see the results of this alchemy documented in real time, my rose bush, your tomato plants, the whole transformation, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the update in 8 days. And before you leave, comment with the one scrap you're going to try tomorrow morning. I'll be reading every reply, and I want to know which method you're betting on first. You have 7 scraps, 7 methods, and one garden that will never look the same. The neighbor who used to pity your wilted tomatoes will lean over the fence next month and ask what changed. You'll shrug and say nothing special, just the coffee grounds from your morning press and the eggshells from Sunday breakfast. That's the real gift of this system. It costs nothing, it requires no special equipment, and it works because the soil itself was waiting for the right ingredients all along. The earth doesn't need synthetic bags of nitrogen. It needs the carbon from your breadcrumbs, the calcium from your shells, the potassium from your peels, the microbes from your rice water. Every meal you cook produces the exact fertilizer your garden requires. The only missing piece was knowing how to prepare each scrap before burial. So James is 94 years old now. His hands shake when he holds the trowel, but his rose bush still produces blooms the size of your fist every November, and he still walks to the garden every morning with a wet coffee filter in his hand. He doesn't read studies. He doesn't watch YouTube tutorials. He simply learned, over 7 decades of trial and error, that the soil responds to patience and dry scraps buried shallow. The science finally caught up to confirm what his hands already knew. Tomorrow morning, before the sun climbs too high, take 1 wet coffee filter from your press. Let it drain for 30 minutes. Spread the grounds on a paper towel for an hour. Then kneel beside your weakest plant, dig a shallow trench, and place that filter like a blanket under the topsoil. Cover it. Walk away. Check back in 8 days. The pH will shift. The leaves will darken. The earthworms will return. And you will understand why the old gardener never bought fertilizer. But here is the unspoken truth that the studies cannot measure. When you bury that filter, you are not just feeding the soil. You are making a quiet decision to trust a method that the fertilizer industry has spent billions convincing you is obsolete. The same companies that sell you nitrogen bags and bright yellow packaging also fund the research that dismisses kitchen scraps as unreliable. The CETISB report from 2012, which analyzed heavy metals in colored newspaper ink, revealed something inconvenient. The same ink that leaches cadmium into your compost also appears in the glossy magazines that promote synthetic fertilizers. The industry that profits from your dependence on chemical bags has a financial stake in making you believe that dried coffee grounds and powdered eggshells are a waste of time. Sue James cannot read that report. His eyesight faded years ago, but he knows because he has watched the same rose bush bloom for 70 Novembers without ever touching a bag of artificial nutrients, that the system works regardless of what the laboratory says. The difference between a garden that survives and a garden that thrives is not a secret ingredient. It is a rejection of convenience. Every scrap you prepare by hand, every filter you let drain, every shell you grind to powder, each action is a refusal to accept that your soil needs manufactured help. The earthworm that surfaces after your first shallow burial is the same species that has churned soil since before humans planted the first seed. The microbe that breaks down your coffee grounds is the same organism that built the dark, crumbly topsoil that nourished the gardens of your great-grandparents. Nothing has changed except your willingness to wait 8 days instead of 8 minutes. The old gardener never bought fertilizer because he understood that time, not chemistry, is the only ingredient the soil truly requires.